Welcome to Practical Business Technology, where we keep you in the know about technology's impact on business. Today's show is sponsored by the Maricopa County Bar Association, and our host is Dave Kinsey, author and owner of Total Networks. Today we're talking about how can Microsoft Teams improve your business. So, hi Dave.
Hello, thank you for having me here.
Maybe we could just start off by an overview of what is Microsoft Teams.
It is Microsoft's collaboration tool that's built into Office 365. For any of you that might be familiar with, say, Slack, it is an alternative to Slack, and it's meant to provide chat and access to sharing files and a lot more. It brings in Microsoft Planner, lot of different tools, but it's a hub of communication, of chat, video, files, what have you.
Okay, so it's a communication tool. Is it something that you communicate with your internal office teammates?
Can be. So it's something that you would definitely. That's a very common and probably the main use case for it is to collaborate internally, but you also have the ability to collaborate with external parties as well, which could be clients, could be vendors, partners, what have you, and we do that as well. So it's a good team for internal and external communication.
Okay.
And collaboration.
So does it come with the base Office 365? Like, does everyone
It does.
that has
It's
Office
part of Office. If you have Office 365, you have access to Microsoft Teams. So and I will say, at one point in time when Office 365 first came on the scene, was there a lot of useful tools beyond just it was Microsoft Exchange, which is how you would host your email and your calendars and contacts and all that stuff. With Microsoft Teams and the evolution of a thing called SharePoint Online, which Microsoft Teams is built on, Office 365 has really come a long way to adding additional functionality, and Microsoft Teams is kind of the crown jewel, I would say, right now currently of the Office 365 suite and functionality. It really shows off what Microsoft's vision of Office 365 can really deliver.
Okay, so if it's part of Office 365, that means it's a cloud application. I can access it from anywhere?
Yes.
Okay. So is there an app then on your phone? Yeah,
you can access it there's an app on your phone. You can get to it from a web console. There's multiple ways to get at it, and that's the idea. The idea is access anywhere, however you like it. So there's many different ways to get it, but I'd say the primary ways would be from your PC or your phone or tablet.
Okay. So how is it similar or different from email?
If you think of kind of the difference between chat and email is I don't know if you'd say maybe slightly more formal, little less real time. Chat is the concept of kind of a more instantaneous interaction, little less formal, shorter kind of stuff, kind of like text messages versus email as well. So I'd say that's part of it, and especially in the younger crowd, it's more natural, right? It's kind of what they're expecting. But even older folks can find, the concept of chat and what Teams does can be much more natural than, say, email for various communication.
So, maybe just elaborating on that, can you give me an example of how your business uses the chat feature?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say we used Slack before we used Teams. So, but we found that Teams is a better tool than Slack. I mean, they're both excellent tools, and Office 365 has Microsoft Teams built into it, and basically it's used with you create this concept of channels, basically, or groups or teams. is, they're called teams. I kind of think of them as kind of a channel. It's a group of people that are part of a team that might logically work together, that need to share communication. And one of the nice things about it versus, say, email is you can add people to that group and all of a sudden, or to that team, and now they have access to the history as well. Whereas if you add somebody to, say, a distribution list in email, or to a thread, they're not going to get what was communicated in the past, but they will if they're added to a team. And so, it's a good way to provide real-time collaboration and just to provide a better collaborative experience for people. So we have kind of groups that are grouped together. Say we have technicians, technical folks that might have a as part of a team where they're sharing all sorts of details, and I don't want to necessarily see all those details, so I may not be subscribed to that team. Or I could subscribe to it if I want to see what's going on, and I can subscribe to it but not get notifications, so I can browse through it or whatnot. There's a lot of flexibility for how you manage that, and so we have different teams in our organization that are kind of logically grouped to do different functions.
So, but in addition to the teams, I guess the way I understand it is the teams have a way of sharing communication about a topic or about an area that everybody has a particular interest. But then there are also ways to do a direct chat.
Correct.
That don't have to be associated with one of those teams.
Yeah, and actually, so the general concept is, you actually have teams, which are logically groups of people, and then you have different subjects within that team, different topics, different channels within there that they're of communication. And that's part of the challenge actually with figuring out teams. It's very flexible, but then you also want to figure out, well, what is the most logical way to organize this, and also make sure where does this make sense versus, say, other tools that we may be using.
So you probably would you be doing this kind of chatting with someone outside of your organization?
Possibly.
And how would that work?
Well, say you have somebody that you're actively collaborating with on, say, a document. You might have a group that you're chatting back and forth, or a set of documents. And that's one of the, there's the concept of there's basically tabs within Teams for things like files, and for things like conversations, and for things like Microsoft Planner, which is a to-do tool. It can be a tab. There can be tabs for all sorts of things. And so, say you have somebody that you're working with on a Microsoft Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. It would be a very natural way to create a team and to be able to collaborate on this document, so that you can, one of the nice things about it is it's really built in to leverage SharePoint Online's capability of what's called co-authoring, where you're, if you've ever been in a document at the same time, and you're sharing with people, Microsoft Teams is one of the easiest ways to perform that. That organization, basically, that meet-up place for you to, say, work on those documents. But you don't have to do it for documents. It can just be for a communication thread. So it really depends on how you work. It's how you work together is how teams get defined.
Okay, so how does security work? Like, if we have a whole bunch of teams within our company about things that are private to our company, but I want to communicate with an outside client, can I set the security for just that team between me and my client so they don't see all the other things? Absolutely.
And and one of the concerns you may want to have is that by default, when you have a third party, like an outside party like your client, that if you were to create a team, you would create what's called guest access. And so And the minute you do that, you also get flagged on that team that, hey, this has guests. I would actually argue that you should take it a step further, and actually designate a naming convention for that team to maybe say, team name dash, with guests, or with whoever you're chatting with or you're collaborating with, the name of that person, or figure out some sort of standard to really make it clear, so that you don't say overshare information. But it's a very the security around it is it has features. Basically, if you're not a member of that team, you can't necessarily if you create teams, you can designate them as public teams within your organization, or you can create teams that are private, and so it has a lot of capability to control that.
Okay. Are there any other security things that are security is always top of mind, right?
Sure.
I assume that it has things like two-factor authentication. And
because it's built on Microsoft Office 365, which has two-factor authentication capabilities built in, and so if you set that up for your organization to require two-factor authentication, you can that can go a long way to securing your Microsoft Teams.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about this being popular by the younger generation, but is it hard for someone who's older to learn it?
Not at all. I'm just thinking how it's a kind of a no-brainer, natural way for younger people to communicate, but it is not just a younger person tool. I will say it's more of Microsoft's vision for the future. I think email is on the decline in Microsoft's view of the world, and in the minds of a lot of people, would sort of like to have less and less email and more real-time collaborative tools, and that's what Microsoft Teams is all about.
Okay. And we talked a little bit about files. I want to go back to that a bit. You mentioned SharePoint, and as I understand it, SharePoint is a way of organizing files like Microsoft Word documents or Excel files. How does that relate, the SharePoint?
Sure.
How does that relate to Microsoft Teams?
Yeah, well, Microsoft Teams is built on SharePoint Online, and I do want to sort of specify SharePoint Online. SharePoint itself has been around for a long time, and it was of really limited usefulness for a long time. I think it was kind of big, ponderous application that people had, and they might sort of develop some things, but it didn't really take off, I think, until it was really now part of Office 365, where SharePoint Online has added so much functionality that makes it a very useful tool. And what Microsoft Teams does is it actually builds folders in SharePoint Online. So when you're using Office 365, Microsoft Teams, you're creating files within a team. You're putting all your files and your documents in a common repository of SharePoint Online that's searchable. You can access and search the information in there as a whole, where you can find things that are in Teams, you can find things that are, say, not in Teams. It's a good way to provide a organizational structure as part of SharePoint Online.
So Microsoft Teams is a way of organizing the files that are in SharePoint?
It is a way. Yeah, it's not necessarily the only way, but yeah, it is a way. There is a lot of flexibility in how Teams is set up, and so which is a two-edged sword, right? So you want to make sure you really kind of think through how you want to organize your teams, how do people logically work. But yeah, it is a way to organize your files and your conversations and all that. So
okay. So we talked about chat. We talked about collaboration and sending messages to one another. Are there ways to do meetings?
Yes, absolutely. You can schedule meetings and have meetings online, say through Microsoft Teams. There's you can do video conferences as well as audio and online type of communication and meetings. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
since it's Microsoft, does it work with your Outlook
Yes,
calendar?
it does. Yeah, it does. So if you're going to say schedule a meeting in Teams, it's going to be on your Outlook calendar as well.
Very cool. What about third-party applications?
Yeah, that's one of the really the growing things of Teams. Microsoft is kind of viewing this as a platform. So it's not just a tool itself, but it's a place for people to build on and extend. So you're going to see different applications that leverage it. Say in the legal space, what's called Law Toolbox has integrated their deadlines application, which is a scheduling, it's a docketing application, scheduling with the court, court rules and whatnot. Is just one example, but there's a whole number of them of different applications, and it is an area of likely growth. That you will see to really extend the functionality of Teams.
All right. Are there ways that you would recommend? I guess like if I don't know anything about this, how do I get started? Is the first step to implement Office 365?
Yeah, I would.
Or make sure I have Office 365.
I would start with if you're not on Office 365, I think it would be a good, and say and you're planning on going that route. I would get yourself on Office 365 first, and once you have that all implemented and done, then using the different functionality that's built into Office 365, Microsoft Teams would be a great place to start with that.
Should you just get started, or should there be someone that spearheads the project?
Yeah, I think there's always a good idea to have a champion within your organization that basically is the person that runs with that leads the charge basically. And so that person should, install the application, get familiar with it. There's training that can be, it's available online. There's training from, companies like me and IT people that will provide training. And then you really want to have that person sort of think through the various ways you might be able to use this, and how you might organize, workflow. How do people work together today? How might you want to work tomorrow? Basically somebody who's good about workflow and kind of your work process, somebody that thinks kind of logically in terms of processes within your organization would probably be a good person to sort of spearhead the effort.
So can anybody add new teams, or do you have to have certain permissions to be able to do that?
You need to enable it. So yeah, you want to enable it, and you want to be deliberate about who can create teams and who can't create teams, and who might, you may not want to let people. You will probably want to be careful about enabling third-party access, like enabling external parties. Well, I say that's a very powerful feature, and it was not in the early releases of the software, but it was one of the most popular requests. Repeated popular requests to, hey, I want to collaborate with people outside my organization. You probably don't want to necessarily give that access to everybody, because not everybody's going to think through, well, wait a second, how are we sharing this information or not? It's a little easier in an email. You're kind of thinking, hey, I am emailing this person. But when you start now to create a collaborative workspace, you may be thinking, well, I'm going to collaborate with the person now, but not think, well, long term, how does that, what does that mean? If I have that team out there for a long period of time, and then say now I add other people to that team, and that team maybe grows. A little more planning, and yeah, you probably do want to control your permissions in terms of who has access to teams, who has access to add members and add external members and things like that.
Because, like anything, you would want it to be thought through. And I mean, I've seen sometimes where there's so many folders in a file structure that you can't figure out what got saved where, because it's just
Sure.
everyone under the sun is adding folders. So I would imagine that there would make sense to have a plan and a thought on how it gets organized before it gets too out of control. But even if you did have more teams or more folders than you wanted, is there a search bar?
Absolutely. And that's one of the nice things because it's built all in SharePoint Online. If you have access to the data in SharePoint Online, you can search it globally online, and it's fairly fast, actually, in terms of how Microsoft Search tool is pretty it's pretty good.
Well, that's for searching for documents. And can you also search within conversations?
You can search within conversations as well, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want to talk about with relation to how we could use Microsoft Teams to be more productive?
I'd say it is Microsoft's fastest growing tool in terms of adoption. And so, as you indicated, you don't want to necessarily just dive into it without thinking. So I would, there's various resources you can find online if you Google this or search this or, talk to your IT people. You can talk to me. Basically, you want to think this thing through, get help where you need it. And it's a pretty interesting new world with Microsoft Teams. If you're not using it today, you really want to, and you're not evaluating it, I would strongly suggest you do get on the bandwagon of evaluating it and seeing if it can deliver good functionality for your business.
Is there anything that I might want to evaluate to compare it to? Like you mentioned Slack, but...
Well, I think, there's pros and cons of different tools. I think that kind of the default thing, setting mindset is if you're on Office 365, see if Microsoft Teams can do it for you. It probably can. Is there some functionality that maybe, you can only get from Slack versus Teams? I have actually seen some things, but I've also seen, I haven't seen anything the other way. But I'm sure there is. I will say I like the interface better on Teams, and I like kind of the organizational structure on it, and the fact it's all built in with Office 365. We were on Slack and moved to Teams, and we felt it worked better. So, and I think most people probably would mirror that experience. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Dave. I definitely feel like there's more that I could learn about Teams, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.